Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today I want to talk to you about the possibility that every time we walk away from an argument, every time we stop engaging a disagreement, we actually lose an opportunity for intimacy. And I want to offer you 3 simple steps of how you can transform your communication to engage the argument, engage the disagreement, and still build intimacy. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to the Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to today's show. I hope today's going well wherever you're going. If you're listening to this on the podcast app or on my website, whatever that is, you're missing out on how pale I look as I look into the camera here and see my reflection. If you're watching it on YouTube, I apologize. I want to talk to you today about fights in relationships. I think one of the things that we often do with arguments, disagreements, and fights is we fail to see the potential value in them, and we fail to see the potential value in conflict when it comes to our relationships. My wife and I are running a marriage cohort in our town right now for 5 or 6 weeks total. It's actually 5 weeks. It's supposed to be 6, but we're traveling in November for a men's conference. So that's out that week. And so we're going to do 5 weeks. And one of the weeks we're talking about the fact that conflict is your best friend in a relationship. And this has spurred a lot of conversation and some emails to me. It has spurred a lot of conversation with my wife. And it is something that we teach pretty regularly to our clients. Anytime we do a marriage conference, we talk about it. Conflict is your best friend. It is one of the things that will transform every relationship you have. And yet it's also something that we tend to avoid as much as we possibly can. We tend to run away from it as much as we possibly can. And so today I want to talk about the benefit of conflict and how we can maybe do it a little bit better, and maybe some goals that we can lean into to help us do it better. Because when we have good goals for the conflict we have, that can help shape the behaviors that we engage in order to move forward in how we are engaging whatever it is we're doing. So if my wife and I are arguing, if my wife and I are disagreeing, if my son and I are arguing or disagreeing, any of my children, my coworkers, my friends, one of the things that we've lost in society is the ability for each person to help other people be better, to help other people grow. And so that's what I want to talk about today with you. What does it look like for us to lean into this? And so I want to start with this idea of every time that we avoid a necessary disagreement because we're afraid that it might become a fight, every time we walk away from a fight because it's not going well. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying we walk away from it to regroup. In other words, when we walk away from it to regroup and to get to a better place and then re-engage it, that's a good thing. But when we walk away from it and refuse to bring it back up, we don't re-engage it. What we're actually doing then is we are losing an opportunity to collect valuable information, what I call data points, so that we can argue better in the future. And I don't mean argue better to win, but so that we can argue better to build emotional security, so that we can argue better to both solve the problem and protect the relationship. And so first of all, we probably need to define a few terms very quickly. For anybody that's new, emotional security is the thing that I believe is the most important for a healthy relationship. It is what happens when we know it is safe to know and be known. When I know that it is safe for me to be completely known by you, and you know that it is safe to be completely known by me, that is emotional security, and that's what helps drive healthy relationships. And so we want to create that, and one of the ways that we do that is we engage in disagreements, and we engage in them well. We engage in them in a way that builds the relationship. And that's really important, because when we can do that, we are moving the relationship forward. And when I talk about solving both the problem and protecting the relationship, longtime listeners will remember that I've talked in the past about we tend to either over-engage a problem, right? Overengagers, all we want to do when you're an overengager is we want to solve the problem. We don't really care if the person gets mad or their feelings get hurt or anything. We just want to solve the problem. I ran into that this week. There was a person that was trying to get something done. They thought I was in charge of it, and I wasn't, and I didn't have good answers for them. So they were very upset with me in a way that there's nothing I could do about it. I don't actually control what they thought I controlled, right? But they had a problem that they needed to solve. And then there is the other side of this. When we underengage, all we worry about is protecting the relationship. And we worry about protecting the relationship so much that it actually hinders the growth of the other person in the relationship, which hinders the growth of the relationship. So what we're looking for here is, the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to both solve the problem and protect the relationship. But by protecting the relationship, we actually want what's best for the other person, which is growth. So we want to dive into trying to figure out how we can be a part of their growth. We're not trying to make them grow. We're not trying to stunt their growth. We're trying to be a part of it, and we're trying to invite them into being a part of our growth. We're trying to invite them into moving forward with us, so that what happens is we actually use conflict as an opportunity to grow the relationship. And the first way we do that is we stop and we want to make sure that we understand what it is that they're saying. What are their emotions behind what they're saying? Do we actually understand what they're saying? Or do we think we understand what they're saying? Because if you know me, you know one of the things that I hate is when somebody says something and then the other person responds with, well, what I hear you saying? No. You only heard what they said. You only heard the words that came out of their mouth. How you interpreted it might be different than how they meant it. And your interpretation may have created a different remembering of that experience. That's pretty common. But what they said, they said. The question is, what did they mean by it? And was I a good listener in waiting to understand what they meant by it before I responded? We want to make sure that we understand before we respond. We don't listen to listen. We listen to respond. And so we might spend a few minutes actually clarifying, hey, this is what I think you're saying, and this is what I think it means. This is what I think you are trying to communicate to me. Is this accurate? We want to spend some time doing that. We want to spend some time asking them, is this what you mean by what you're saying? Do I understand correctly what you mean? Because what that does is it shows them that you are more concerned with understanding them than you are with telling them what they mean, which is really important because most people tell us what we mean. Most people tell us what we mean and then they respond to that, especially poor listeners. And one of the things that I have a men's group that we meet, and one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is there is a danger in people universalizing their experience. So if you say something to someone that is close to their experience, they can universalize their experience as the means by which they respond to you, which doesn't typically work well. And if we're willing to use ourselves here, bring this back to ourselves, that means that I too am vulnerable to expressing an answer to you that is based more on my experience than what you're saying or what you mean by it. So I need to spend time clarifying with you, what is it that you're saying and what do you mean by it? Because that helps us to engage an argument. And rather than making the argument about winning, which is why it typically goes bad, right? We often say, well, I just want peace. I agree, but peace often comes at, in fact, almost always comes at the price of processed conflict. And how we process conflict is we spend time making sure that we understand, what are you saying and what do you mean by it? Because what that does is it allows me to respond well, and it increases the chances that we will find some level of common ground. If you want to see an illustration of how this goes bad, have conversations with people about our current political situation. Find somebody and ask them what their position is, and then just disagree with them and watch it go. I was watching two people have a discussion about Ukraine and Russia and the war and how President Trump responded and how President Biden responded. And what struck me, and yes, this was on social media, but it's not that different in real life. what struck me is no one actually took the time to try to understand what the other person was saying. They just said what they were saying louder. And that is a terrible way to communicate. It actually hurts us when we're in conflict. And it's one of the things that I think creates this almost pathological desire to get out of conflict. I want to believe what I believe, and I don't want it to be challenged. And I will avoid you challenging it by saying it louder and louder and louder. Instead of let me engage what I believe, let me engage what you believe and make sure that I understand what it is you're saying. And this is a really good way to remember that every argument we have is an opportunity to better understand the other person. It gives us an opportunity for those data points if we listen and clarify. The other thing that it helps us do when we listen well is it helps us to remember our humanity and the other person's humanity. One of the biggest problems with what I have that's going on for the last 12, 15, 16 years politically in America around issues is that we are dehumanizing those we disagree with. And when I listen and clarify, and then I try to respond to the belief points that you have, not just to you, right? So it's not, I think you are wrong. I think your belief on this situation is wrong. And whatever it is, I think that this action is wrong. And part of that is we've made our actions who we are. If I say to someone, hey, I think that Ford is better than Dodge and they drive a Dodge, we've made it so that somehow I'm hating on them, which is an almost silly point of view, because how do you be defined by everything that you believe? I don't understand that. But what our goal here, I think every time we engage in conflict, what our goal here is we want to better understand the other person so that we have data points, so that we can help better engage them, so that we can solve the problem between us and we can protect the relationship. I also think a worthy goal is we want to remember their humanity and our humanity. We want to remember that everybody in this is human. And what that does is it encourages us to listen to them and to respond to their points, not attack them. And I think we tend to pull out of arguments here because we typically, as humans, at least in my observations, we tend to do this poorly on both sides. The person that is making the statement, they tend to take any criticism as hating on them. But then the other side of that is when we disagree with a person, we do tend to attack them, right? It is not uncommon for somebody who supports Trump to call someone who doesn't support him names. And it is not uncommon for someone who doesn't support Trump to call someone who does support Trump names. It is not uncommon for church-going people to call people who are not church-going people names. And it is not uncommon for people who don't go to church to call church-going people names. And we've normalized that. And then we wonder why people can't make the distinction between a criticism of what they're doing and who they are. But partially also, we have raised kids that no matter what they do, it's right. No matter what they think, it's right. Whatever they feel, however they respond when they feel something, it's right. And so we've not really taught our children how to distinguish between criticisms of them and criticisms of what they believe. And this has led to a society of adults who don't know how to make that distinction. They don't know how to distinguish a criticism of them from a criticism of what they believe. It's all one mess, all one soup. And so if someone criticizes me because I have a Pirates hat on and I'm supposed to be a Yankees fan, that's not a criticism of the fact that I'm wearing a Pirates hat. That is somehow a criticism of the fact that I, as a human, am somehow deficient. We're no longer allowed to tell people, I think you're wrong. But the flip side is that has developed a society where anytime we hear you're wrong, we react with venom and vehemence because somehow they have attacked me. And both of those are destructive. Both of those take away from recognizing the humanity in others. And so what we need to do is we need to listen and clarify, and then we need to respond to the person's actual belief points. Like, for instance, when you say, I think Olive Garden is actually truly Italian food, I disagree with you. I think it can be tasty food if it's the salad and soup, but I don't actually think that it is authentic Italian food. Instead of, what's wrong with you? How in the world could you think real Italian food is at Olive Garden? And I realize I'm being a little facetious there, right? Because I try to pick things that either I can talk about in really broad sense or that I don't get tripped up here on and somebody loses what I'm saying because they disagree with the point. And maybe there is people who think that Olive Garden is authentic Italian food and they've now turned me off. If so, please come back. Right? As you lean into this, the first thing you do is you listen and clarify. So you ask questions. Hey, do you mean this? And then maybe you ask it again. Okay, so do you mean that? Or what does that mean to you? Spend more time being curious about what they're saying and what it means than telling them what you think about what they're saying and what it means. I watch this pretty regularly. Like I said, I run a men's group. And one of the things is that there can be guys who, when we're talking, their entire world is through what their lens, their experience. And they'll say things like, well, the bottom line is, or I think we're missing something. And I'm often like, wait, where does that come from? And trying to be curious about that can be hard because I don't understand where you're coming from. But almost always it goes better when I'm able to be curious first before I tell them what they think. And invite them to be curious about what other people are saying before they tell them about what they think. So you listen and clarify. You respond to what they're saying, not attack them. And you work to be curious about their point, more curious about their point than you are worried about responding. Curiosity before responding. This helps me to remember the other person's humanity. And there's a popular saying out there that respect is earned, not given. I'm not sure I actually agree with that. If you're a longtime listener, that I do not agree with the idea that trust is earned and not given. But I also think that respect is given. Now, here's the thing. I can talk to a person respectfully and not respect what they do or what they believe. And I think that's something we lose in our modern society. Like let's just say that I don't actually respect what you say. We'll stick with the Olive Garden illustration. I don't actually respect that. My mother and father are both Italians. I'm Italian. Italian Americans, right? But there was a long time where I really thought of myself as Italian first because it was our culture, it was our family. And I don't typically, to be honest with you, respect the idea that authentic Italian food is found at Olive Garden. But I could talk to somebody respectfully about that. Now you might be saying, well, of course you can, Joe. The consequences of that aren't that big a deal. And I agree. It's really not that big a deal. If somebody wants to go spend their money at Olive Garden, that's their business. But I would say that the more I am willing to talk to someone respectfully, even if I don't respect what they believe or who they are, the better chance I have of both solving the problem and protecting the relationship. The better chance I have of remembering their humanity, because remembering their humanity is completely under my control. Seeing the humanity in them, talking to them with a respectful manner is in my control. Now, again, this is something that we tend to get a little conflated in modern society. We tend to look at disagreement as inherently disrespectful, and I don't agree with that. And that starts with, on my conservative friend sides, if their kids disagree with them, they're not being respectful. That's hogwash. That is simply not real. But it's also not real that on the other side that you can't disagree disrespectfully, right? That somehow, I'm just disagreeing with you. There's no way that's disrespectful. That's not true either. And it's almost become a badge of honor for my friends on one side when they're disrespectful to people on the other side to be like, and I don't care that this is disrespectful because I'm right. That's silliness. And recently there was this economic blackout when this drops, will have been last week, where everybody skipped one day. They picked the 28th of February to skip going and shopping. And there's a whole list of them. And my friends on the other side were like, well, that's stupid because you're going to buy all your stuff on the 27th or the 1st. And then my friends that were on the blackout side were like, shut up, don't talk. Why can't we respectfully disagree about that? Why can't my friends on one side be like, I don't understand how this accomplishes anything because you still are going to buy the things that you're buying? And then why can't my friends on the side of the blackout be like, or whatever it's called, be like, well, okay, well, this is why we think it matters. Why can't we talk about ideology? Why does it have to be shut up, don't talk? Why can't it be, hey, this is what I believe, why I'm doing what I'm doing and why it matters. And well, this is why I believe what you're doing won't actually have the impact that you're doing. Why can't we have that conversation anymore? Because I would love for us to get back to that. Because everybody you interact with is human. And they deserve respect. Now, you don't have to respect what they believe. If they're doing bad things, you don't have to respect the bad things that they're doing. But you could still talk to them respectfully. The idea that because I'm right, I get to be a jerk to you is silliness. There was a movement in the church where people would be jerks for Jesus, and it still exists, but it's smaller. But like they're like, well, I'm telling you what you need to know, so I'm being a jerk. Well, that's weird because Jesus wasn't a jerk. Now, Jesus said hard things. Jesus said hard things about what people did. I think one of the most misquoted verses in the Bible is, "Judge not lest ye be judged." Read the rest of that passage, fam. Like, seriously, go out and read the rest of it. The rest of it talks about discernment. There's many times when Jesus says, hey, if you're doing this, that's bad, and it's going to bring bad consequences. But he's talking about what the person is doing. Even the woman caught in adultery, when he's writing in the ground, I don't know what he's writing. I think he's writing the people's names that brought her, who they were probably doing bad things with. But he looks at her and he says, hey, go and sin no more. He was talking about behaviors. And if you're not religious, you're like, you just wasted 3 minutes of my life. I get it. But if you are, does your arguing reflect the humanity of the person you're talking to? Or is it just not there? And if it's not there, that says more about me. If I argue with you and I refuse to admit your humanity, that says more about me than it does you. So I'm hopeful that today's episode will bring to you some ideas about, look, every argument you have is an opportunity to develop more intimacy. Because intimacy comes when we can solve the problem and protect the relationship. Intimacy comes when we can disagree and still respect the person's humanity, still talk to them as though they're human in a respectful tone. I hope that these 3 simple steps, listen and clarify, respond to the belief without attacking the person, and remember their humanity, will help cultivate that for you, will help cultivate your relationships, because we all want intimacy. And it's really one of the things that we're missing in modern society. Very few people feel like they have deep, meaningful relationships. It's really interesting. You know, a lot of relationships are built around drinking and partying or social activities. And a lot of people, when they do the surveys, when they do the research, man, I miss intimacy. I don't feel like I have intimacy. I wonder if that isn't because as a society, we don't actually engage in things we disagree on. What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. Reach out, let me know, send me a message, send me an email, comment on this post if you found it on my website. Whatever it is you're looking for, I'd love to hear from you about it. Whatever it is you think. If you think I'm all wrong here, I want to hear it. Tell me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.